So two questions come to mind with these semi-silent switches. Number one, does it fulfill the needs of someone who needs a switch that makes as little noise as possible? So think of using it at the office. Number two, how does a switch perform for someone who doesn't really care whether or not a switch is silent? How does it perform as a general purpose switch? These almost seem like two contradictory questions. On the one hand, silence has to be a core part of the switch's identity, and on the other hand, silence has to almost not matter. So in this video, I want to find out, can the semi-silent have it both ways? Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, where we make videos on finding the best switch for you. So let's first get the specs out of the way. As its name indicates, this is a linear switch. So the push feel is going to feel smooth. It has a standard spring, not one of those dual staged ones or super long ones. So it's not going to feel too light and it's not going to feel too heavy. Most switches have a spring of this length and weight, so there's going to be comfort from familiarity. These definitely feel like just normal linear switches. It'll feel like an old shoe in a way, which is to say that the typing experience is going to feel pleasant. These are slightly factory lubed, so they're pretty smooth. It's not exactly this friction-free smoothness. I'd say it's just a touch below that, so there is a little texture to these semi-silents. If you really want the super smoothness, you'll have to open them up to lube. You'll find out that these are wing-latched switches. So when it comes to switch housings, there are typically two kinds. They just represent different ways to attach the top and bottom housings. I find wing latched housings to be a little more difficult to open, but maybe that changes if you have a different switch opener than what I have. So these switches are long pole switches. Unlike most long pole switches, these aren't super duper clacky. You would hope so, because it wouldn't make much sense for a so-called semi-silent switch to have this loud and pointy sound profile. So in terms of sound, I'd say they are pretty neutral, maybe a little bit on the deeper side. But the long poles do reduce travel a bit. Here we have a 3.7mm travel, whereas standard switches have a 4mm travel. For what it's worth, I don't think this difference is super noticeable if you're coming from a switch with a 4mm travel. My feeling is that if you do notice the difference, you'll get accustomed to it pretty quickly. But as the name of the switch suggests, we're going to look at how silencing, or at least semi-silencing, is going to affect how it sounds and feels. So let's start off by setting the context. If you're looking for a silent switch, a big reason would be because you're going to use it in some sort of a shared space. So think of office work or any sort of space where you have to be really considerate of sound, where, this sort of sound won't do. So let's first take a look at a normal non-silent switch. With normal switches, you have hard materials bumping against each other. So you can imagine this makes a louder noise. In order to silence the switch, you want to get rid of this hard plastic on hard plastic action. As a result, on the stem of most silent switches, you'll find that there are these little rubber pieces. These dampeners eliminate the noise you get when the stem hits the housing. As you can imagine, this changes the typing experience. When you type on most silent switches, it'll feel a little more padded. Some other words that come to mind are felty and velvety. In any case, the bottom out is going to feel a lot less stiff than their unsilenced counterparts. The semi-silents are different. What's unique about them is that these switches don't actually have padding on the bottom of the stem. The dampening pads, or these blue things here, are actually on the top of the stem, which is kind of interesting. Here's the logic behind putting the pads on the top of the stem. Whenever you press down on a key, it's going to make a noise. That's the stem hitting the bottom housing. When you let go of the key, the stem rebounds and hits the top housing. So whenever you type, it's not only on the way down the key makes a noise. It makes a noise on the way back up as well. These are called semi-silent switches because they don't silence things on the way down. They silence things on the way up. These semi-silents will feel like regular switches. This is great if you want a typing experience that doesn't feel like it's padded. But is it enough to only silence the top out sound and not the bottom out sound? So to contextualize these switches, I'm going to do a sound test of them alongside some other switches. Some of them are going to be silent, some aren't. Throughout the sound test, I'll simultaneously plot each switch's loudness so we get an idea of how loud and quiet they are in relation to each other. Let me summarize the results of the sound test with a drawing. Normal switches make a substantial amount of sound, both on the downstroke and the upstroke. Silent switches make pretty much no sound on both the downstroke and the upstroke. These semi-silent switches make the same amount of sound as a normal switch on the downstroke, while making the same amount of sound as a silent switch on the upstroke. So, in a sense, it is semi-silent, or at least half-silent, because you hear half the amount of noise that a normal switch makes. So, is this a switch a contradiction in terms? Did it live up to being both a silent switch and a good general-purpose switch? These switches are certainly less overwhelming in a way. By getting rid of the upstroke noise, the typing sound it makes is going to sound cleaner in aggregate. It's going to sound less cluttered. So their silencing does serve a purpose in creating this cleaner sound profile, but they're still going to create significantly more noise than your typical silent switch. So these semi-silent switches aren't really silent switches in my eyes. Creating half the amount of noise isn't enough to qualify it as being a traditional silent switch. So if you need absolute silence, don't get these. But for anyone else, it's worth considering. The sound profile ends up being really unique. Subjective factors rule supreme here, and it's worth testing them out for yourself. We offer a try before you buy program where you can try these at home for 5 days. Link in the description. With all that said, here is the full sound test of these switches.